Yes, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. And as you can see the picture, it is from my home office. This is how a morning can be in the dark, in the polar night. It was morning in Tromsø a couple of days ago. And we can see Tromsdalstind, that is a mountain. And it's actually a holy mountain in the northern part of Norway. I work as a professor in education at the Arctic University of Tromsø. At the Arctic University of Norway, campus Tromsø. And Tromsø is also called the capital of the Arctic. And when I started to study in Tromsø, I moved south because I grew up and I was born at North Cape. And perhaps you have heard about that. It is on the 71st latitude north. So I really come from the northern part of Europe. Almost all the northernmost island in Europe, if you don't count with Svalbard. And as I said, I'm really happy to be here and to share some of my thoughts and some of my research with you. And I hope that you understand my North English. So, and if you don't understand, just stop me and ask. And you can also correct me afterwards, but perhaps not when I'm talking. Why contextualizing the pedagogics could be an important question? Because education, I called my speech Education in the North of the North, contextualizing pedagogics to the Arctic with a question mark. And if we read social theories from the 90s and also from the beginning of the 20th centuries, we can really ask what is the matter of contextualizing education and pedagogics? Because as Anthony Giddens said and wrote about in 1991, he said that we are not what we are, but what we can make of ourselves. And if you see this wooden doll, Pinocchio, he is dancing and he is singing. There are no threads that is binding me. And then we can ask, why is it so important to have connection? We can ask when we come to a new place, we ask, what is the code? What is the net code here? How can we get connected? Why is that one of the most important questions in our time? I think it is because that where an event takes place makes a considerable difference to how it takes place. And I think that one of the reasons that I have been doing research in the northern areas in my academic work was that I was born right, you can see, I grew up here on that island. And it's high above the polar circle, the Arctic circle. And I have done much of my research in the northern area of Norway and also in the northern area of Sweden and Finland and also Russia. And when I went to the US, I also did some research in Montana among First Nations in Montana. And I've been to Canada, but that was in the southern part, in Nova Scotia. But my focus has been on the north, and also my focus has been on the center-periphery dimension. And very often that dimension also combines with the north-south dimension. So what I would like to focus on is two forms of universalism that goes together. And the first is the metrocentrism in youth and educational research. And the other one is the implicit deadlines within what we call an age-segregated social order. And I can send you these slides so you can have them after. And I also have references. What is metrocentricity? I got the question earlier today. It has to do with that the research on young people's life, it goes hand in hand with ignoring the spatial processes in young people's lives. So, and that means that urban settings are seen as the urban, what did you say? You said it was the urban, not the urban ethos, but the urban, I forgot the word. But urban settings are seen as ambiguous, globalized, and undifferentiated. And so place very often disappears from the analysis of young people and young pupils' lives in general. And if you don't agree, we can discuss afterwards. And that means that young people outside the major metropolitan centers are marginalized. And that originates from the more metrocentric and nature in both classic and contemporary theories of social change. And because modernization is described as urbanization, and that's the model of modernization, in which the rural ways of living give way to an urban modernity. The rural is disappearing and the urban is taking over the place all around the world. And that means that place and locality become linked to the past stability in pre-modern societies. And when I say it, it is so much embedded into the theories in social sciences, in pedagogics, and also in our ideologies. And so that this vision of a global modernization as an almost universal process, it is almost fueled by the laws of nature. It converts geographical difference into a temporal sense. It becomes a kind of as of the periphery becomes on an earlier stage in history than the urban modernity. So, and that means that differences between geographical areas, the rural, urban, center, periphery, they are transformed into a story about catching up. Why can't the people in the periphery catch up? I have quoted Massey, and I have her Dorian Massey, geographer. Yeah. And I have written about film and how film can produce or how filmmaking can be an example of place construction. Yeah. And one Norwegian film, it's called Cool and Crazy. And that was a film about a man's choir in the far north. If you have the possibility, the film is from 2000. It's an old film, but if you have the possibility, I will recommend it. Look it up. And it was a choir consisting of old men in the northernmost part of Norway. And a member of a jury at the Gothenburg Film Festival, he said and wrote also that he was really surprised because nobody, not Norwegians or Russians, they looked the slightest bit alienated, backward, or deprived for living in such a remote corner of the globe. And you can find this again in very many different versions in different histories. So this was obviously meant as a positive expression. Still, the underlining of the difference between city people and people in the northern landscape indicates some preconceptions that might not be considered as only positive. And I think we have them. I have studied young people living in the urban center, Honningsvåg, where I come from. It is less than 3,000 people living there. And they make a contrast between themselves and people coming from smaller places, because they are more savage, they are not that up to date, and they are called the wild people behind the mountains. Perhaps you have it here too. And together with a Swedish and a Danish colleague, we wrote an article with the title The Internal Other. Because with such a frame of reference, people in the periphery are not coeval others, not actually people with their own trajectories, history and future. They are just behind, at a later stage in their development. I don't say it is like that, but I say that sometimes this kind of images are functioning. And then geographical differences, they become sources for other differences. So this kind of cultural categorization through binary oppositions serves as the origin of economic and social differences between geographical areas. As we heard earlier today, the head teachers in smaller schools in the periphery, they have lower salaries than head teachers in other schools in more central areas. And it is also documented that such representations have material consequences in terms of disinvestments, regional distribution policies, shutdowns, work opportunities, myth creation, and reproduction of stereotypes. Pardon me if I'm a bit dystopian, but I would have some more positive images too. Yeah. So the new hegemonic tale of globalization is told as a universal story, but the process is one which is not, and on current terms cannot be universalized, and that's very important to be aware of. And another thing is that global changes does not transform places equally. While some places are fueled with progress and growth, others may change in quite opposite direction. And that is also what we see in Norway. Some of the rural places, for instance in Lofoten, where there are really many possibilities for outdoor activities, skiing, climbing, a lot of outdoor activities. They are many young people, well-educated young people, move to these places, and they also start their own businesses as in tourism or outdoor activities. And we also see that big oil companies, they are also choosing some places more than others. And of course, young people growing up in what can be termed as dwindling places, they face completely different challenges than their siblings growing up in places powered by progress and growth. And that's important differences to be aware of. And then it is the second universalism, the standardization of age norms. It is a kind of culturally age norms that is functioning. It is historically specific norms concerning what is the ideal timing of events over the life course. Chronological age is an important criterion by which behavior is evaluated. You have to do the right things on the right time in your life course. You have to take upper secondary education while you are between a certain age. If not, you are too old and you are perhaps too lazy or what they, yeah. So age matters as to what behavior is considered appropriate. And that means that life courses unfold according to given timetables. It's a kind of a universal standardization. So young people's pathways are increasingly measured also above the academic track, because it is the academic track that is the normal track, even in places where it has not been the normal track for earlier generations. And pupils in vocational tracks tend to follow roads that are less orderly and less standardized according to age. And that means that they does not fit in with the cultural age norms. Early school leaving can be seen as a new form for deviance. And this universalization of age norms is a cosmology of only one narrative. It contains only one narrative. It undermines the existence of a multiplicity of simultaneous trajectories. I can't say trajectory. I have to practice. Yeah. So this and the geography of education. We have been talking about that in the table, but we haven't used that term. Geography of education is a field of research that has mainly focused on differences when it comes to schools in urban settings. But it is also very important to focus on the differences in different rural settings and also between urban and rural settings. It has to do with the variability of educational performance and the different trajectories related to geographic localization. And that is well documented both in Norway as well as internationally. In Norway, the rural-urban and also the north-south categorization makes up for a lot of this variation. And that means that in Norway, people they leave secondary school, young people leave secondary school earlier before they have their final exam. It happens more often in the northern part of Norway. And the further north you come, less more it happens. And I will give you some explanations later. There has been, as we all know, a changed geography of both education and work. Even in rural places, and also increased urbanity, deindustrialization and centralization of public institutions has changed the structure of the work and the opportunity structures when it comes to working possibilities in many places. Because of work available for young people without secondary and higher education is often insecure and poorly paid, and the costs for those who do not succeed in school might be more consequential than for earlier generations. And still, as I said, 1 out of 4 young people in Norway are not following the contemporary cultural age deadlines. So the rates of early school leavers are significantly higher in peripheral areas in the north than in other areas in the southern part. And the same place might not be experienced as the same place for young people living at the same place as their parents. A young boy, he told us that, "I wish I grew up when my parents were young. There was more people, more life, and more work there then." and also the work that was available was not negatively regarded. Yeah. In rural areas in the north of Norway, education often entails out-migration. Finnmark, as the northernmost region in Norway, is the same size as the whole Denmark. And it is only living 78,000 people there. And of course, it's not possible to have a secondary school on every small place there. But because of these huge distances, it's not possible to commute on a daily basis, so people have to move from home. And a young boy, he said to us that when you move from home to live on your own, you do not have parents who are there to push you and to get you up in the morning and to school every day. So often you just stay at home. I should have done better, he says. It's my fault. No one else to blame. You have to take responsibility for what you do. I did not put priority on school. I was simply unable to. So he takes the blame himself. It's a kind of individualization of structural structure when it comes to educational possibilities. So young people blame themselves for not following the cultural age deadlines and this age-segregated social order. They do not follow the growing demands of formal education that is prescribed by the universal age norms and youth trajectories. So many of them also blame themselves for not having a job. And they are also blamed for being lazy. They don't have this, they lack the individual work ethics. And the problem is that there are lack of work for those who are without education. And that is very often a result of regional economic restructuring. So my point is that global changes do not transform places equally, and that's very important to have in mind. And this concentration of capital and corporate power is also about increased economic competition among places and regions. And some places are fueled with progress and growth, and other places change in opposite direction. And this is large-scale changes that change the form and rates of inequality, both within and between nations. And this is really affecting the possibilities that young people and children have where they grow up. And when we speak about choice, that's a very popular word today. When we have a look at choice and also this uneven distribution of opportunities, the education sociologist Mike Corbett, he is from Canada, from Woodfield, working on studying young people in Nova Scotia. He has written a book that had the title Learning to Lead. Education is Learning to Lead, based on Willis' Learning to Labor. Yeah, that's the same title. And he says that uneven privilege is often constructed in neoliberal discourse as choice, which is perhaps the most misunderstood and ideologically laden notion in contemporary educational discourse. So choice is not perhaps the right word to use in many situations. And that means it brings us back to the importance of place when we are focusing on children and young people's experiences, opportunities, and also constraints. And that is also important to challenge negative stereotypes about rural youth, and also to demonstrate the spatiality and temporally variations when it comes to young people's experience and also young people's opportunities. So the definition of youth and the lived experience of youth may vary between countries, regions, rural and urban settings, and communities, and are interwoven in complex ways with other categories such as gender, ethnicity, and class. So it is an intersectional problem, and we have to use intersectional lenses when we are studying this, and also when we are educating both teachers and children and young people. It's important to have in mind the geography of inequality in what we can call a world of opportunities. So we need to look very carefully at the processes of changes going on in different places and analyze the human consequences of these broader processes, because they have. It is broad structural processes, but it has human consequences. And that's also important to re-theorize the significance of place, and also the images of globalization as a universal process that is producing a homogeneous modernity, and that's not. And also producing a lot of opportunities within free, unbounded spaces. And that also neglects the materiality and the structural conditions that shape the experience and learning possibilities for young people. And I use very often to work within theoretical positions called phenomenology of practice. And that's important, to focus on both the material, the structural, and the socio-cultural conditions. Yeah. It is important to look and to have in mind the location-specific capital that young people develop where they live. And also, as we were speaking about relations, the social networks and also the socio-cultural learning abilities. These pictures is from boys that live in Kalevala. It's not in Finland, even though it is the national Finnish epos called Kalevala. They are in the Karelian part of Russia when it was possible to go there. And as I said during the lunchtime, that I used to say to my students that I would like to focus on a very important part of the learning that is happening all the time. And then I used to quote John Lennon. He has written that life is what happens while you are busy doing other things. I say that learning is happening while you are busy doing other things. And this is an important part of the learning that this young boys did. And what about the weather? We are in the north. You have hardly mentioned the weather. It is anthropologist called Tim Ingold, and he says that much has been written on the perception of landscape, virtually nothing on the perception of the weather written, even though we speak of it all day. And today you did not reach when this, And that is, it's extraordinary, he says, that something that has such massive impact on people's activities, moods and motivations, indeed on the whole tenor of social life has been so little considered in the social sciences. So he says that if weather conditions or interaction with people and things, then it also conditions how we know them and also their relations with them. I had to go into this because I have a project about refugees that are settled in different places, rural places in the northern part of Norway. And some was settled in a very small place in October in 2016, coming from Damascus in Syria. And then it was hard, it was storms, and they also experienced this polar night. It was dark and their driving license was not accepted, so their children had to walk 1 kilometer at the one road that was at that place, in the dark and in the snow and in, you see, this kind of weather. And the mother, she said to me, oh, I wonder if I should go back to the war in Syria, because this is so harsh. And I have also used the term from Kincaid, saying contradictions of space, because if you can't use your shem, what you have learned through your upbringing, and when you feel that you can't use them anymore, and it's really difficult to find out how to go on then. So Kincaid, contradictions of space. But the weather is important, and we know that today also here. Another young boy, he says that, he told me that we live so far north that here are no trees, but I enjoy living here. And he comes from the place where I grew up, and that is Magerøya in Finnmark. And another funny thing is that a friend of my mother, they had in Norway we have what is called hytte, also it's small cabins, and now they are not so small anymore. But they moved to a place, and they had a hytte in a place where there were trees. And then she told me, you know, I like it there, even though there are trees. But here you can see some of the last two pictures is from North Cape, both in the autumn and in the midnight sun. Here is the references, and this is Trusa. No, yeah. So thank you very much, and I will be happy to answer questions and have comments and protests and yes.